This podcast is brought to you by AutoVision and its AI assistant, Avery. Avery delivers data-driven appraisals, pricing, and detailed strategies for every vehicle. Visit autovision.com to learn more about Avery, where precision meets profit.
Hey, it's Daily Drive executive producer Jake Neer in Detroit. On today's bonus episode of the show, the second and final part of our own Molly Boygan's interview with Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow. It's part of our ongoing series of interviews with candidates running for Michigan's open U.S. Senate seat in 2026. It's a key race when it comes to control in Congress and the future of policy that directly affects the auto industry. We brought you the first part of this conversation on Wednesday's show. If you missed it, make sure to go back and check that out. In this part of the interview, Senator McMorrow talks about her ideas for effective tariff policy and how lawmakers on all levels can help create better conditions for homegrown manufacturing and talent.
If what you say is true, that the sort of effort to undermine research and development and research funding for universities is detrimental to the future of the auto industry, is there anything that states can do to sort of fight that effort?
Yes, absolutely. So I am currently the chair of the State Senate Economic and Community Development Committee, and the bulk of my work for truly the last 7 years, from minority vice chair to currently the chair of the committee, has been pushing for legislation and research to reform our state's approach to economic development so that we rely less heavily on major tax breaks and incentives for large-scale manufacturing projects and invest more in communities and small businesses and innovators and entrepreneurs. I have a package of bills that I introduced with State Senator John D-Mich, who's a conservative Republican from Northern Michigan, that would compel the state to create a 10-year comprehensive economic development strategy that considers how do we get to the goal of growing our population, growing our median income, considering outcomes like access to housing and transportation, but in a way that is more regionalized. Because what I've heard, we hosted roundtable discussions all across the state, and there is growing frustration, especially outside of Southeast Michigan, that Michiganders feel like we have put all of our eggs in a single basket. And we've just seen what happens. We lost out on a SanDisk manufacturing facility in Mundy Township, which the state was really hoping and the company was hoping would be a CHIPS Act award. But then the November 2024 election happened. Donald Trump became president. In his first State of the Union address, he ripped the CHIPS Act and said that it was a terrible piece of legislation, and the company pulled out, citing economic uncertainty. So what I've heard loud and clear from people across the state is we can no longer afford to put all of our eggs in one basket and hope for these large-scale manufacturing facilities to kind of come and save our economy, when instead we should be focused on how do we invest in what's next. Somebody who came before my committee, and I think about this all the time, was Doug Song, who was the founder of Duo Security, became the first unicorn in Michigan they sold to Google. And he said what he's observed is that Michigan is really good at understanding what we've done. We have a hard time imagining what we're going to do next. So who's the next Ford? Who's the next GM? Who's the next Rivian? I mean, something that haunts me to this day is in 2021 when Ford made their announcement on Blue Oval for Tennessee and Kentucky, that was like an earthquake went off in Lansing. In that same year, Rivian announced that they were going to relocate all of their design and engineering to Southern California. And it was like nobody even noticed. And that to me, like when you are relocating design and engineering, that is, the brain center of a new company. And they were willing to pay a premium to move to Southern California because that's where the talent was. So yes, states can do a lot more. I'm leading on legislation to do just that so that we plant more seeds and figure out who's going to be the next big innovator in this industry and grow them from scratch here in Michigan, because that's what we did to be successful in the first place.
Turning the page for a moment to a slightly different topic, you've criticized President Trump's tariff strategy as chaotic. What does effective tariff policy look like?
So you have to do it with your allies. I mean, first of all, the fact that we've effectively started a trade war with Canada. I was at a protest down in Detroit where there was a joint protest between the Canadian side of the border and the Michigan side of the border, and people holding signs up saying, we love you, Canada, and we're your partners. I haven't talked to a single Michigander who has beef with Canada. There was a small window of time where President Trump announced the first round of tariffs, and they were specifically focused on the auto industry. And the UAW came out in support because there was a world where a focused strategic tariff policy would bring shifts back to some of our plants here in Michigan, and we've seen that happen. But then to go just days later and announced sweeping reciprocal tariffs on basically every country, on every good that we buy, with no consideration for the knowledge economy that we have here in the United States. It didn't account for the service industry that we provide. It was just physical goods. So now, yes, maybe we've brought a shift back at Lake Orion. That's a great thing. We should all celebrate that. But if all of a sudden the cost of everything else is skyrocketing, we are never going to grow bananas here in Michigan. We just don't have the climate to do it. Your clothes, your kids' shoes, everything is going up. And there are a lot of, I think GM and Ford can weather that storm. They can plan for it. I mean, Ford announced they took out a massive loan just to be prepared. But there are a lot of small businesses who can't. I think of a company like Detroit Axle, which was here in my district in Ferndale, that grew a massive business specializing in refurbished auto parts, started by an immigrant family, great company that was employing previously incarcerated Michiganders, giving them a second chance. I mean, just a great success story. And he said, these tariffs are killing me. I got to close the business. And they were about to expand. They were going to open a second location in Michigan. They were going to open another plant in Mexico. And it's just gone, just like that.
Coming up, the conclusion of our own Molly Boygan's interview with Michigan State Senator and U.S. Senate candidate Mallory McMorrow.
Just when you think you've priced a vehicle perfectly to sell fast, the market changes and potential profit slips through your fingers. After all the work of scouring auction sites, tracking competitor rates, and analyzing market trends, the loss of time and money leaves you frustrated. Meet Avery, your AI assistant from AutoVision. Avery revolutionizes how you acquire, price, and sell vehicles by analyzing every detail, from retail values to market trends. And the best part? Avery doesn't just give you numbers. It explains every recommendation so you know everything that was factored in. Picture this: faster appraisals, smarter stocking decisions, and more profitable sales, all without the exhausting legwork. With Avery, you don't just stay competitive, you lead the pack. Ready to see Avery in action? Visit autovision.com.
So when you talk about targeted tariffs, it sounds like you're saying there is a place for tariffs in the automotive industry that may not apply to other manufactured goods that the U.S. just doesn't have the capacity to make. But where is the target? Are you suggesting targeting it by country, targeting it more by part, reducing the parts that are subjected to tariffs? Like what does that sort of targeted approach practically look like?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. Number one, I think it's developing it with our allied countries, considering the auto industry is a global industry, that these vehicles travel, especially here in Michigan, across the border between Michigan and Canada, upwards of 24 times, depending on the vehicle, during the process of manufacture. Working with the companies themselves to understand, okay, what does the global supply chain look like? And then building, a really thoughtful tariff policy over time that, rather than throw everything at the wall all at once, which is what President Trump did, and then is reacting, right? I'm going to announce everything, and then in 30 days, I'm going to cancel it. And then 2 weeks later, we might put it back on, and now it's 30%, now it's 10%. I mean, it feels like it's ready, fire, aim, instead of let's build this collectively with our trading partners, with the companies who would be impacted, and start small and see how it goes. Because I imagine there's a world where had he just stuck with the initially announced tariffs that just impacted the auto industry, maybe we would have seen, Lake Orion as a great example of a success story of vehicles coming back to be manufactured there. Great. Without all of the reciprocal tariffs that kind of, not even negate the progress. But if you got your job back, but now everything costs 30% more for the rest of your life, you're still net negative on your take-home pay.
How does the desire to return parts and vehicles manufacturing to the U.S. square with your contention earlier that Michigan needs to compete with Silicon Valley for engineering and technical talent? Because you hear about this division between the knowledge economy and the manufacturing economy. And, on the one hand, the contention with the tariffs is that it's skewed too far in the direction of encouraging manufacturing, while not acknowledging the knowledge economy gains that the U.S. has made. So how can we do both?
Yeah, I mean, I reject the idea that there is a division, and I would differentiate between Michigan and Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley specializes in software and apps and tech. And, I remember when Tesla launched and looking at them as a company, and a lot of my old boss, Franz von Holzhausen, who was the head of design at Mazda, is the head of design at Tesla now. So a lot of my old colleagues went over to Tesla. And I remember thinking then it's going to be a rude awakening to realize that designing hard tech like a vehicle is much less forgiving. If your app is buggy and your phone doesn't work, you turn it off and you start over. If your car doesn't work, you crash and there are fatalities. So, what Michigan specializes in is innovation into hard tech. We know how to design and engineer things that we then know how to build. So I think you need look no further than what's happening down at New Lab next to Michigan Central. That is an entire facility that their mission is to cultivate, to find, to support startups in hard tech. It's not apps, it's not software, it's not services, it's physical things. And my belief is if we can incubate a lot of those startups, then as they expand and they move out of New Lab, I mean, that's the goal, is that those companies get big enough that they can spin out on their own. They're going to need manufacturing facilities. They're going to need workers. They're going to need everything that grows up around it. And I fundamentally believe, as I said earlier, Michigan became the automotive center of the United States, not because we manufactured it, because we invented it. And then manufacturing grew up around it. So I believe if we look for what's next, what's the next hard technology, whether it's in auto, whether it's in something else, we should invent it here, we should design it here, we should innovate it here. And then because we have all of the capability in the workforce here, we should build it here. And I think that's how we support both the knowledge economy and manufacturing. But my fear is that we are overspending right now in incentives and tax breaks, trying to just get manufacturing at the expense of the rest of that pipeline and that process.
Michigan State Senate Majority Whip Mallory McMorrow, thank you so much for coming on Daily Drive.
Thanks, Molly. Appreciate it.
A quick note before we go, we also interviewed Senator McMorrow's two main opponents in the Democratic primary race for Michigan's open U.S. Senate seat. You can find our interview with U.S. Congresswoman Haley Stevens on our August 11th episode, and you can find Molly's interview with Dr. Abdul El-Sayed on the August 27th show. We're also working with the campaign for former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers to find a time for an interview. Stay tuned for that in the coming weeks. That's all for this bonus episode of Daily Drive. We'll be back on Monday with a brand new full episode of the show.